Welcome back, everybody. I'm Luis Guardia. I'm the president of the Food Research and Action Center, and it's my honor to open this very important session. For far too long, government data has buried the reality of food insecurity in Native American communities. It's just another example of how systemic racism that has painted and plagued our country for hundreds of years continues. And this lack of data is part of a greater issue of erasure and invisibility with historically marginalized communities. As we know, if the system doesn't count you, you won't get far. In this session, we are not something else, food access and security in Native American communities. We're going to discuss the need for disaggregated data. And we know that this is so important. As one of my mentors has said to me, measure what matters. And this matters. Here's why. Because we know that the pain we see in food insecurity is rooted in systemic racism. And it affects more communities than our Native American communities. This issue affects other communities of color that we've done a lot of research on and whose numbers we've seen. And we also know that the issues affecting Native food insecurity can also impact broader rural food insecurity. And if they're counted, Native communities sometimes are often lumped into something else or another category that is sometimes there with an asterisk or some other footnote that points to data collection that might be missing things and other reporting issues. So we've seen this happen a lot during COVID, and the analysis, and this analysis on food insecurity, but the truth is it's been going on for decades. So at FRAC, we've been privileged to help raise this issue with our friends in the Native communities. And to that end, in this workshop, we're going to go through a few things. We're going to learn what is known regarding hunger in Native American communities. We're going to learn about the efforts of the Native American Agricultural Fund, NAF, and others to improve the situation. And we're also going to hear about efforts to create equity and parity where none currently exists. So I'm very excited to present our two speakers today. First is Jamie Sims Hipp. She's a citizen of the Chickasaw Nation of Oklahoma. She was recently appointed to serve as CEO of the Native American Agricultural Fund, or NAF. And FRAC is also really pleased that Janie serves on our board. And we also have Valerie Segrist. Valerie is an enrolled member of the Muckleshoot tribe, and she serves as NAF's regional director for Native Food and Knowledge Systems. And so now I'm going to turn it over to Janie and Valerie for their thoughts on this. And then following their remarks, we have Michelle Bart from Feeding America and Katie Jacobs from FRAC, who are going to help moderate the Q&A.
So, hello, everyone. And yes, we are live, and we're very excited to be with you all today. But we wanted to start off the conversation with actually sharing with you something that took our breath away several months ago. And if our folks who actually control the levers here could actually pull this one slide we want to show you up, then we will show you what took our breath away. And honestly, it took this slide actually was pulled out of reporting on the most recent presidential election coverage at CNN. And think for a moment, if you're a Native person and you see that slide and you see yourself listed as something else. Well, first of all, I think it probably means that anyone at CNN who was responsible for this slide should have a little bit of a need to come to our session today because they clearly don't understand who we are. But it also, Valerie and I also were concerned that we wondered really who else was in that category too. But that's what led us to actually want to talk with you all today about this issue about erasure, but also in the context of all of the work that all of you do every day as we do, working on food insecurity and anti-hunger issues and making food more accessible to Native people. So you all could take us back to our faces, and we'll visit with everyone for a little while. But then we want to also open up the session and really hear from you all and entertain some questions from the audience as well. Valerie and I do best when we're talking with each other, not to you or to each other. So that's what we're going to do, and we're going to make this as fun for us as we hope it will be informative for you too. But it's really important when that happened. There were folks all over Indian country who really got very vocal very quickly about what that sort of reference does to us. We are not a racial background data point. We are a political classification, as well as how we are also referred to each other and to ourselves within the broader American landscape. But it also gives us a moment to actually share with you some data points and to talk with you about how Native people, how Indigenous people are actually reflected in the data around anti-hunger and around food insecurity. So we want to share with you just some reality checks, if you will. And but to refer to us as something else really takes away who we are. And I want us all to sit in that for a moment, because I don't know of very many people who work in anti-hunger and food insecurity issues and feeding people who do not understand that the inherent dignity of people and really understanding who they are and where they're coming from is so central to feeding people. And so we wanted you to learn a little bit more about us. There are 574 federally recognized tribes in the US. There's over 60 state recognized tribes. If you actually think about that, you're probably led, if you don't know much and haven't worked with us at all, you're probably very curious about where we are and who we are. And there are over 5 million people in the US, according to the last census data, who identify as Indigenous people. We live across 35 states. Think about that for a moment. 78% of Native people live in urban settings. Native people control over 100 million acres of land across those states. So think about that for a moment. The cumulative land base of Indian country would make us the fourth largest state in the US. Our population is on the rise. We have increased 39% since 2000. About 30%, a little bit under 30% of our people are under the age of 18, so we are a young population. The median age of Native people, Indigenous people who live on reservations is around 29. That's a fairly young population if you think about it. The states with the highest percentage of Native people are Alaska with almost 30%, Oklahoma around 18%, New Mexico 14.5%, South Dakota 12%, Montana almost 10%, and the list goes on and on. The number of Native peoples across the US exceeds the population of over half of the states, according to the last 2010 census. That would make us the 23rd highest in population across all the US. 19 tribes have acreages larger than the state of Rhode Island. 12 have tribal land base larger than Delaware. The Navajo Nation would be the 40th largest state and is larger than each of 10 states. But I want you to think about one thing when you're hearing us talk about kind of a reality check of who we are. Think about food insecurity across a landscape that is larger than the state of Rhode Island or larger than the state of Delaware. And think about having no grocery stores in that entire land base. Think about having one convenience store that has food in it across that entire land base. You can start to see the magnitude of the issues, and you could also start to put your head around how we solve for concerns around food insecurity and food accessibility and healthy food. But erasure is unacceptable. Being referred to as something else when talking about us is unacceptable. Because here's what I've learned through 35 plus years of being in food and agriculture. If you aren't present in the data, you don't exist. And when COVID happened, we knew that we had data issues. We knew that some of these concerns were real, and a lot of us, Valerie, myself, other folks that we're going to probably refer to during the course of this moment with you, have been really in the weeds fighting these battles for a while because it's so important to be visible. But when COVID happened, we were literally fighting for the health and the well-being and the lives of our people. We were fighting to get food into our communities, but we were also having to deal with the issue around data because it became even more pronounced, the inability to actually track what was going on within our communities. When you aren't followed in the data sufficiently with a sufficient clarity, and you start to become an asterisk or referred to as other or something else, then the gaps and ramifications of that become extremely dangerous. And quite frankly, Valerie and I believe, and I think we are backed up on this, we believe it also leads to death. And we've seen that. We've seen it with our own eyes. We've seen it happen in disaster and significant events like COVID, like the pandemic, but we also see it in death by 1,000 cuts over time. Because when you're absent and you're not considered when policy is being made, then it becomes extremely difficult for your voices to be heard. That is why we felt this session was important, but we also felt that raising our voices at this moment in time was also extremely important. When you are absent from the data is there's really no comprehensive measure of your food security. Limited data becomes diffuse and incapable of being actually tracked back into individual tribes, right? Individually, federally recognized tribes. And I want to go back to that federal recognition just for a moment, because it is a bedrock of our relationship with the federal government and with other people in the United States. Our ancestors were here before anyone else was here. We were so blessed and so ecstatic on Monday to actually have Deb Haaland sworn in as the first Native secretary of a department in the U.S. government. Think about that for a moment. She actually very readily, and thank goodness she does, identifies herself as a 35th generation New Mexican. You guys, her people can be traced all the way back 35 generations, not 4, not 5, but 35. I'm so ecstatic and so excited for her to be in that role as Secretary of Interior. But that was such a monumental moment for all Indigenous people. I'll share that with you. It gives us very much a lot of pride, but also a lot of opportunity to be visible across all of our communities. But there's an entire body of law called Indian law that actually stretches back to literally the first cases that were ever filed in any court in the United States. I'm an ag and food lawyer, and the very first cases that we hear about and we learn about in law school and constitutional law There's a trilogy of cases that establish the bedrock of this nation's court system and its jurisprudence, and they're all three Indian law cases. Just think about that for a moment. Our rights and the obligations that are owed to Native people, Indigenous people, are actually embedded for many of our peoples in treaties that predate the presence of any state government in the United States. So, and the other thing that we constantly push back on is that folks really don't understand that tribal governments today manage an entire portfolio of responsibilities, many times on behalf of the federal government through contracts and compacts with the federal government. Tribal governments are not subservient to state governments or local governments. We manage human services, healthcare, natural resources, agriculture, transportation, roads, law enforcement, infrastructure and housing, economic development, commerce, public safety, and on and on and on. But what we don't manage is the federal feeding programs. And that hurts our people. It hurts our people every single day because our tribal governments are managing vast swaths of public safety and welfare functions of the federal government, but historically we have not had the support to actually manage the federal feeding programs. There's one program that we have a bit of a control of, and it's the Food Distribution on Indian Reservation program. But it's a small program and it doesn't reach all of our people. So I'm going to quickly turn it over to Valerie. She's going to know that I've probably not hit every high point that she wanted me to hit in this kind of intro. But I just wanted her to, and then she and I will banter back and forth as we do every day because we work together. But the underreporting and the lack of reporting that's occurred during COVID is significant. It's significant in terms of being able to track the data and track what is happening to Indigenous people as the pandemic has swept across our communities. We were extremely vulnerable. Many tribal governments, tribal leaders swept into action. They closed their borders. They literally did everything they could to actually track the disease as it was, sweeping across our communities. We reached out and immediately took care of our elders. We immediately took care of our original language speakers. These things are extremely important to us, and we swept into action. But if you see news reports right now, you will see that the vaccination rate among Indigenous peoples is extremely high. We don't mess around with this. This is an important thing to protect our communities from. But I will share with you at some point, we will walk through the pandemic, but the food insecurity issues will remain. And we have to really push on those concerns and become more visible in the data. But Valerie, I'm turning it over to you.
Thanks, Janie. Yeah, it's for all these reasons that, right now, more than ever, culturally appropriate research and real data collection is critical. And I'm so proud to work with alongside Janie, and get to geek out about these things every single day. And also work for the Native American Agriculture Fund because we work in that space of really helping to lift up and support Native American farmers, ranchers, fishermen, agriculture. And in order to do that adequately, we have to know what the gaps are. And one, sort of awesome burden that that COVID has brought into our communities is the illuminating of those gaps. And it's research that can help really identify the points of intervention that need to be made so that we can help improve this situation, the entire food system, how we feed people in this country, and how they're seen. And unfortunately, when we continue this this method of invisibility, then we can't adequately identify those spaces. And so for all those reasons, NAF, our response was to partner with FRAC and launch this food security survey, because we know that there is currently not a comprehensive national measure of food security among Native American households, neither during or before COVID. And obviously, the world has been disrupted by this, so there has been effects of that. And since April 2020, the US Census Bureau has conducted a weekly household pulse survey, which collects data on a range of topics, including employment, health, housing, and food sufficiency. But data for this measure are not easily reported or able to disaggregate from Native American populations. So we're not able to drill down. We're just not even considered in the whole algorithm of it. So we're not able to drill down exactly where those gaps are at. And so we are working to change this. We want the government's food insecurity surveys to cover Native American and Indigenous peoples. And since they currently are not, we see ourselves uniquely positioned to collect adequate data in this space that reflects the landscape as it is today. And we know this because we work with the grassroots efforts to help respond to food systems and strengthen food systems in this country in tribal communities that represent everywhere from Alaska to Hoopa to Mosh Pee. We're all over across this country. Our grantees we have over 170 and have who have access to a tremendous amount of the population that care about these issues in tribal communities. And so that unique position, we didn't feel we felt it would be a little irresponsible to not try. And so here we are. We're pushing the survey out to see what happens. We have a hypothesis that we'll get better response rates because we're working with people who have direct access to people who are concerned about these issues in their community and need better access to food. So we've developed a survey to better understand the issues of food insecurity and low food access in Native households during COVID-19 and beyond. This survey is still active, so a comprehensive and final analysis of survey data has not been completed, but preliminary results show that far too many respondents experience food insecurity and challenges with access to food. Among the sample, almost half of respondents have experienced food insecurity, and almost a quarter experienced very low food security at some point during COVID-19. And this is basically since last year, so March 2020 to present. We are seeing that Native people turned to their tribal governments and tribal-led organizations for food assistance during COVID, with half of the respondents receiving food assistance through a tribal government or tribal-led organization. We also see that food sovereignty, which means the inherent right of a people to adequately define their own diet or food system, remains a key factor. So food sovereignty remains a key factor. About half the respondents reported gardening, hunting, sharing, harvesting, and trading food as a source of sustenance for their families during COVID-19. In particular, home gardening increased 30%, which is so fun. And then since shelter-in-place orders began, the use of the FDPR program that Janie just mentioned has actually tripled. And the use of food pantries has increased 200% since last March. Grocery curbside pickup and delivery increased 600%. Eating in restaurants, shopping in grocery stores, and using farmer markets has all significantly decreased. But another really I'm finding like these really interesting success and kind of potential new normal as we move forward, like with the delivery increasing, the food pickup and delivery increasing 600%. There are numbers that indicate that non-tribal local farmer food donation increased 600%. That's really incredible. Among Native American respondents, half have indicated that during COVID-19, they are quite frequently very worried about whether they will have enough food before they run out of money. And more than half have said that they cannot afford to eat balanced meals. So, in the interim of all this, and I'm just so eager for this full analysis of this survey, because it just paints a really critical picture. And this isn't to say that there are certain places in the line in which people should be treated, but my mentors and my elders always remind me that when we can make things right for Native people in our communities, what's good for us is actually good for everybody, right? We're that microscopic view of being able to address these very critical situations and issues in our infrastructure that will feed people adequately. We're the canary in the coal mine. What's happening for us exists, and so that therefore it exists for everybody in this country. And so when we can get it right, and we witness time and time again our grantees, all of our colleagues and comrades out there in this food movement who are doing just incredible work every single day. They are turning pennies into gold and making amazing marks and movement in the data that this is not a risk. And investing and getting it right in Indian country is what is the remedy for the entire nation, to be honest. So I could go on and start bragging now about our grantees, which I feel like I want to start pulling in. Janie, I don't know if you want to share any of that, but I also know that Janie's such a just deep well of knowledge around the economic potential and power that Native American communities hold. And I don't know if you want to share anything about that, or the food insecure environments and the solutions that we also have that we get to witness every single day.
A couple of things I wanted to pick up on, Valerie, that you made mention of. At the Native American Ag Fund, we actually were born out of a 2 decades long litigation battle involving access to credit. So you're thinking, what does access to credit have to do with access to food? And I will tell you just about everything. Native farmers and ranchers were literally systematically shut out of actually receiving loans to improve on and build their farming and ranching operations. And when that case was settled back in the early days of the Obama-Biden administration, after it had lingered for quite some time, we all knew that was just the beginning. Because we actually needed to put legs up underneath our producers, our farmers and fishers and our ranchers and our food people, as we really lovingly and broadly refer to them, because food and agriculture are done in many ways, in many of our communities, in a very historic and traditional way, but also in a very modern way. So we're literally all over the map. One of the interesting things that we found when we were in the early days of the pandemic, the fund actually quickly put out some additional resources to our first set of grantees. You have to keep in mind, we only started in late 2018. And we were literally just in the first round of our first set of grantees, and the pandemic hit. And so we quickly put some additional resources in the hands of our 2019 grantees. And I tell people this all the time. According to the National Ag Statistical Service, because Valerie and I love each other because we're such nerds about data. But according to that statistical service over at USDA, there's around 80,000 native farmers in the US. Well, in a $2 million push into the hands of our 180 grantees at the time, we were able to surface up 85,000 native farmers. So this idea that there's only one way to reach people where they are, I really have to push back on that anymore, because we were able to surface up just in the middle of a pandemic with a small amount of resources. We were able to directly connect with more farmers and ranchers that were on the front lines of feeding our communities than the actual NASS Ag Statistical Service has found. And they have been really leaning into getting better data around who is actually farming and ranching in this country. And I really have to take my hat off to them, because they've been really focused on getting better data around native farming and ranching. But it gives you a sense that when you actually enlist the communities that you're trying to track in the actual tracking, then you actually can get better data. We saw that extremely quickly. We also saw some amazing things happen on the ground that were so innovative. We saw folks who are doing food work in pueblos that literally called us and said, we have to have a bigger impact. And they started sending seed packets to people all over the country. And I will tell you, because of a non-native friend of mine got one of those seed packets, they were also sharing that knowledge and sharing those vital seeds that were coming at a time when they could be quickly put in the ground, with people all around the country. We know, Valerie and I know tribal governments who reached out and have been feeding their broader community that are not members of their tribe. So this idea that we are isolated and we choose to stay that way is just not real. It's not real. And the idea that I keep coming back to is we must really do a better job as a country of really reaching out to all communities and to understand where they are in the food insecurity battles that they're facing. And they're acute right now. We all know it. But we also have to do a better job of reaching people where they are, so that we can actually feed them with dignity, provide food to them so that they can fashion their own results and their own means to never be in that place again. And that's what I see, and I think Valerie sees it too within the fund's grantees, is we are on fire for making sure that food insecurity does not exist within Native communities anymore. This has to be accomplished, and it can be accomplished during our lifetimes, but we're going to have to lean into it, number one. But also, number two, we're going to have to insist that when people are trying to quantify and explain the problem of food insecurity, they've got to take into consideration indigenous populations, and we should never be something else, ever again. And whoever is in that something else category with us, consider Valerie and I to be speaking for you as well. Whoever is in that category needs to be visible, because if we're not visible in the data, then we're not visible in the interactions that happen and the policies made built on that data, and the issues never get better. So Valerie, I think let's turn and hear some questions from whoever joined us today. And I wish we could see you all, because this is frustrating, but we're going to make the best of it.
Thank you, Valerie, and thank you, Janie. This is Michelle with Feeding America, and it's so great to be here with you guys. First, let me just express my heartfelt appreciation for your work, your advocacy, your years of experience building teams, building partnerships, and for bringing this topic forward and helping some of us to come out of the shadows and speak up with a strong and brave voice as well. So I appreciate that. I also just want to offer my sincere congratulations to you, Janie, regarding your nomination to the USDA General Counsel. I know that I'm sure I'm one of many, many, many that are cheering you on from behind, and my heartfelt congratulations to you.
Thank you so much. Thanks.
So
It will be an
exciting.
honor.
Exciting
I'll
time.
tell you, it will be an honor to serve. My grandmother raised me that when you are called to serve, you serve. And I hope that I am confirmed. But we've got lots to do, and I'm just grateful and thankful to be asked to serve. It's the most important thing any of us can do right now. So, but let's
I
have some
agree.
questions.
Yeah, absolutely. So Katie from my colleague from FRAC is going to be helping behind the scenes to lift up some of those questions. I just want to remind people to put questions in the poll on the platform that you're on, and Katie will help to bring those forward. While she's looking at those, I'm going to start us off with one question really quickly, and I'm going to direct this to you, Janie, and then maybe Valerie, you can jump in too. As we think about and deal with racial justice issues, which have been going on for a long time, but have been more front and center, I would say, in the last year, and specifically how these issues impact Native communities' health and food insecurity. Can you share some of your wisdom on how people can be allies to Indigenous communities and help to make a difference?
So Valerie, why don't you take that first, and then I'll join in.
I really think that people can lean into us, like I was really trying to illustrate before, we have answers. Come to us because we have solutions. And historically, that has not always been the reason why people wanted to partner or have viewed a local tribe as maybe a burr in their side. But we also have so much good intention to show up in a space and really heal it. We're designed to be systemic thinkers who stack function on function and are thinking ahead. That's what we saw with so many of our grassroots organizations who took those rapid response funds we pushed out the door and made long-term sustainable change in their community, standing up meatpacking processing companies in Oklahoma in 7 months and distributing thousands of pounds of seeds out there when nobody could find them online to anybody. And so we're in a space right now where we're just a leveraging opportunity there to partner well, and the visibility piece is the healing part for us. It's part of healing our trauma in this nation, and that's why this is so important.
And I'll add to that just briefly. We're not going to fully heal as a nation until all Black, Indigenous, and other people of color are brought into all of the conversations and all of the tables. It just is what it is. And we are going to have to lean into that, and we're going to have to be true allies. And one of the things I always share with people, folks who know me know that I'm really, I know that individual organizations, nonprofits, all the different people who do work within Native communities are just precious to the whole effort. But I'm one of those folks that know that our tribal governments have a significant role to play here. And I think what we've seen literally over decades is that we really don't. We want to be allies, but we don't. We're not sure. I don't know how else to say this. We're not sure about tribal government sovereignty, and I think most of it is because you never learned about it in school. And so you have a sense that you either think it's not real or you underestimate the power and the ability to be resilient thinkers and problem solvers. And I will go back to what Valerie said. We've been on the front lines of so many issues, including food insecurity, including the need to create meaningful jobs in rural and remote and urban places. We've been on the front lines. And bring us in and help us, but show up and be a true ally, and make sure that when you do show up, that you are willing to show up in a way that enhances tribal governance and self-determination and self-governance. Please don't ask us to leave behind our political nature and our recognition as a peoples in this country in order to be our ally.
Great points. Thank you. I'm going to ask Katie to raise up a question, if she would, from the audience. Katie?
Absolutely. Thank you, Michelle. I have a two-part question here. You spoke about the lack of data as part of the greater issue of erasure. What are your recommendations for organizations to work together with tribal governments and Native-led organizations to collect data, food insecurity, and other data in Native communities? And then the second part being, how can we advocate for better racial ethnic categorization in the census and the American Community Survey?
Can I take that first, and then Valerie, I'll shoot it over to you. I'll be brief. You must work with tribal communities. You must work. Don't show up with your solutions to our communities. Come into our communities and begin to know us, but please understand that we have protocol and responsibilities to our tribal members around data collection also, because there's some really bad history around extraction of data from us and use of that data against us. And so I would tell you, and Valerie, you may come at this differently, I just think respect for who we are, respect for our protocol, and respect for our tribal governments, and really understanding who the organizations are that sit in and around our communities that are trusted allies to our people. Showing up with the wrong folks at your elbow, it's hard to recover from that. So, Valerie, what do you have to add?
Yeah, I agree with all of that. There are so many amazing Native epidemiological centers across this country, located in every BIA region, that are uniquely designed to be able to do research in communities and make sure that what you're doing has integrity and is ethical. So that's really cool. And also, it's important to come into a community or wait to be invited in, also, and make sure that you're meeting people where they're at, that you're truly doing research for something that's going to meet the needs of the community, and that real partnership is happening where both sides are, receiving some sort of benefit or lesson learned or information that can help us move forward. And I see that happening time and time again, and we talk about it a lot in our communities as helicopter research, where people just sort of land in, get what they need, and leave. And many times it's not even vetted through a process. It's just taken and gotten and utilized for their own personal gain or professional gain. And in our communities, we are doing things like changing school lunch programs with tribal resolutions, and could use some help with some research around how that's increasing nutrition in the community. Or there are so many different interventions. We're standing up curriculums where we're getting kids outdoors. What is that doing to their stress hormones, and how does that inform people being adequately nourished? And just there's so many opportunities. And I think coming in with an open mind and an open heart and good intentions are going to take you very far.
One last thing I want to add about that too is we have people around our communities that are our farmers and ranchers and fishers who have, the reality is that most of the food products that are grown around our people leave and never come back. And so that we're all about at the fund making that connection between food insecurity, hunger, and the challenges of fighting that, but also linking it back to the foods that are accessible already that somehow just leave, and our people are still hungry. And we are all about localized and regionalized solutions to that so that things don't get just dispersed and never come back. And I think that connection to the food people, to the people who grow food, that's we are in those spaces like wild, and that's our mission as a fund. But we also know that it's the answer to the question. Just helicoptering in food, why do that when you can empower the people who actually are growing the food? Uh, that to me is a sustainable long term solution. So I think we've got just a few minutes left, and I bet you we're going to lose our feed here, Michelle.
Yeah, we're not. We're not. This is just, we have an extra 20 minutes on top of that, so we're okay.
Oh, good.
Katie, do you want to ask another question?
Absolutely. Thank you all. And I have a question that ties in perfectly with the issue of native grown foods leaving native communities. And you talked about connecting those foods back to native communities. And this question is asking specifically, what are some of your recommendations to do just that?
Well, Valerie knows I can't help but be the first speaker on this one because last fall we actually released, and you can find it on the Native American Ag Fund's website, we actually released a Reimagining Native Food Economies. And if you take a look at that, it actually talks about the significant need for food infrastructure. And I don't want to soak up the rest of our time talking you through that document, but it is there. And all of our team, Valerie included, we all had a hand in actually pulling that together and putting it out there publicly because it's a way that we can fully integrate all of the potential solutions in terms of connecting to the food production that's happening in the area, connecting to the fishers, connecting to people who are raising animals, a whole 9 yards, but also linking it back into the people who need to be fed within those regions. We believe that resource is out there, and we're going to keep pressing forward to fulfill that vision. We are already being told that there are tribal governments who have taken a look at that and are really already moving forward to implement pieces of that puzzle. So take a look at that. Valerie, do you want to add?
I think also this food insecurity survey will help us. We're able to drill down into a zip code to figure out, some folks, for example, one of our grantees I had a conversation with last week, they are trying to stand up some food policy that will help also involve food safety issues that will help their livestock processing happen more efficiently and less burdensome for the farmers and ranchers. But their council wanted more information on what the closing that loop, right? How many people would be interested in a product like that in their community. So we're able to take these numbers and really shine a light on the opportunity and hopefully encourage and empower more Native people to become involved in their food system, be grower, harvester, fisherman, farmer, rancher, whatever, and feel, confident in their choice to become a person who offers food in their community, which is, again, goes back to healing our trauma of being, separated from the land and another food system being superimposed. We're not wanting to go, take away everything and totally disrupt the whole system, but we're looking at the gaps through research and able to intervene so we can address the situation and make it better and more culturally relevant and appropriate.
The other thing too, and I want to jump in here, my tribe does it. I know there are other tribes that do it as well because I've heard reports and I've seen it in action. But there are several tribal governments out there who regularly contract and work with non-native producers, but also members of their own tribes who actually raise animals and or fruits and vegetables, you name it, within their regional area. And that is such a powerful way to anchor, if you will, sustainability and resilience, is to really connect the dots between the folks at the local regional level who are hungry, but also who the folks who are out there who are raising food. And I will tell you, anybody who knows me knows that I'm a lifelong advocate of our farmers and ranchers and our fishers and food people. That is what makes me get up in the morning. But this country is in an intergenerational shift, and we're going to all have to do a better job of sitting up underneath our farmers and ranchers, no matter who they are, but particularly our BIPOC farmers and ranchers who have had a systemic problem of getting access to technical support and resources and capital. We need them. We need all the farmers, ranchers, and fishers we can possibly support in this country. Our population continues to rise. The pressures on our land base around the country continue to happen. We have a responsibility as human beings who live in this country to pay attention to actually sitting up underneath our people who grow our food and who make it available to us. And that is one thing I'm extremely passionate about, but I see it every day, tribal governments and tribal nonprofits and people who are out within our communities. We see it. Valerie and I see those connections that are just logical, and why wouldn't we? But somehow it gets lost in translation somewhere along the way, or it becomes too complicated. We got to figure out as a country how to make this happen. And I think Valerie's right. Not only are we the canary in the coal mine, we can also show you what resiliency looks like and what innovation looks like. And people just need to open their ears and hearts and be in communication with us and others like us more. Everyone who falls in the something else category needs to be heard from and at the table consistently, because the strength that we have is underestimated.
Absolutely.
100%.
I just, as a nutritionist, I have to geek out here for a second, because this is also, you know, it's all of those things that Janie's saying, and the having meaning and purpose in your community. I feel like that's such a part of like feeding ourselves, that is as feeling whole when you eat a food that is essential for you to live, right? Like something rich in omega-3 fatty acids that we essentially have to live for our brain to function. You know, also is being part of a community and having the feeling, the sense of purpose and meaning. And nothing gives you more purpose and meaning than feeding other people. It's just an inherent human activity that we have. It's a reminder that we're human, that we have to eat food to exist. And we rely on the environment, the people that produce those things, for us to have good health. And so, you know, living in a time when epidemics like diabetes and heart disease are so prevalent, not just in Native communities, I mean, they're the top causes of mortality in our communities, but they're also a global issue, these inflammatory diseases. And the remedy is always the foods that are native to America. It's always the pumpkin seeds and the sunflower seeds and the salmon and the clams and the oysters, all the things that are sourced here. You know, I think the difference between what our food culture looks like and those of like European countries like Greece and Italy. I mean, I'm watching Stanley Tucci every Sunday, super jealous about the Italian food system, but they just romanticize their foods. Like we should be having the same reverence, I guess, for our foods and celebrations for them, no matter who you are living in this country, because they're indigenous to here and they're so nutritious, and just a little bit can feed people adequately. So because they're nutritious and they're real whole foods that have been grown here and cultivated for a long time, we should be leaning into that and romanticizing our foods too. And because they make meaning happen on so many different levels.
Well, and Valerie knows that I can't, she just gave me a lead in. This is what I do when I'm around young people. I lean into them and I tell them, I don't care what anyone else tells you. There is nothing more important that you could do with your life than to feed people. You need to be proud of that. You need to take pride in it. You need to, if that is your passion, you need to embrace it fully. But so many times, you all, we tell our young people, oh, you don't want to do that. That's too hard. Oh, nobody does that. You should do something else. And I just keep looking at our young people and I go, no, you have to do this. Somebody is going to have to come up behind us. And there's nothing more important than feeding people. Nothing. And so I think we miss the opportunity when we don't bring the youngest people, the youngest voices that we have into these conversations, because that's where our leaders are going to be, and they're already there. We just need to help their voices be heard more vibrantly, because Valerie and I have the joy to work with young Native people all over the country, and my husband and I look at each other and go, we just need to retire and let them just have at it, because they're much better than we are. And Valerie knows that too. We have to really not wait. We can't make them wait till they're 50 to have a voice. They need to be helping us on this journey, but there's nothing more important that they can do with their lives.
Valerie, as a follow-up to that, can you share, one of maybe your favorite stories so far from some of these impact grants that you have of where they're involving youth in an innovative way?
Oh my gosh.
Or have you seen anything yet from some of these?
So many. I don't even know how to start. The very first one I think of is Megan Baldy. She's one of my favorite. She's a hoopa. She's one of my favorite people in the world. She is so she's a food preservation specialist, which I didn't even know that title existed. But she has brought in her. She has several kids, all boys. I think she has one girl. And during the pandemic, when they were all sheltered in place, her job for her part of her grant we funded was to help teach food preservation classes, how to can and dehydrate foods properly and things like that. So she put them behind the camera and they launched these videos, these Facebook Live videos that eventually became YouTube videos. And her bone broth demonstration has 58,000 views. Like, she really leaned into her, like the youth and their technology and what they know about it and what people want to see. She leaned into that and was able to reach so many people. 58,000 views, that's insane for just how do you can deer bone broth and why is it important? There's that. The Cowlitz Tribes Youth Program had several of their youth do gardening classes online. So they shipped seeds out and then met via Zoom with their little tiny seedlings and plantings. It was so cute. And they were talking about how they were growing them and then how they were giving that food away to their community surrounding them. So, they took these opportunities that were, I just feel like, just thinking through how to utilize the space and what we have to make magic happen and, empower youth at a time when, as a parent, I'm watching, some of our education systems just really fumble and trying to get, working really hard, but really fumbling at trying to have a safe balance between kids being in front of screens and going outside. And what I saw time and time again in these programs and projects were people leaning into outdoor learning, to getting their hands in the soil and connecting that with science, technology, engineering, math, and giving it out to their community. So many amazing opportunities that happened. And now we have some videos being produced online. I'm telling you, I can go on forever and brag about these grantees. They're just like, they were my remedy in 2020. but they're standing up videos of youth and what they learned about plant medicine in their communities, and making beautiful websites to reach people, but also tell a story about how we are giving food away and empowering our community with good health in the process, and raising up a generation of people who, you're right, Janie, like every single day I feel like I could retire because I hear a story about how this work is going to go on with our Native youth, that they are showing up and they find incredible joy and fulfillment in doing this work. We're seeing it in increasing graduation rates in my own community here, just getting kids outside and increasing their awareness of traditional food knowledge.
Thank you. Sorry
Awesome.
about that. I froze for a moment. I am
Thank
back.
you so much, Janie
Yeah, I
and
apologize.
Valerie.
Katie?
And as a follow-up question to that, I know as Michelle is getting back in, you talked about the grantees and some of the effects of their initiatives. And so when NAF provided funding to its grantees, what did you contemplate the impact on nutrition and health might be?
Well, it may seem strange to some people, but let me explain kind of where we are coming from here. We were not created for the purpose of dealing with health. We were actually created from the litigation around discrimination and access to credit. And you're thinking, what do the two have together? Our purpose is to sit up underneath our food people, our farmers, our ranchers who were impacted by and continue to be impacted by those kinds of challenges. So there's a lot to be done in that area, but we know that by impacting them and by lifting up the food people, the farmers, ranchers, and fishers, that we will get to the issues around health and food insecurity. We also are of the opinion that you must connect the dots. You can't just stand up one without addressing the other. Why would we spend so much time and resource sitting up under our food people if all of the food leaves our community and their own families don't have enough to eat? It makes absolutely no sense. So we knew early on that there was a deep interconnection in weaving those issues together within our communities. And honestly, it's not something we at the fund are doing. It is what is already happening resiliently and organically within the communities. So it is really, I mean, when we do grant making, we actually have an application process and we give you some signals of what we think would be great, but we literally look at whatever comes in the door, and we literally look at all the innovation and ideas that are coming out of community. And that's what our trustees have before them and decide on what to fund. But the reality is that we know we have to connect the dots. We cannot solve for hunger and food insecurity by ignoring the food that is already within our community. We have to understand that connection. We have to know what is happening that farmers and ranchers and food people struggle with to stay in business and to stay doing what they do. Because if we can solve for that, then we can also solve for keeping food in the community, building infrastructure that helps that to happen, but also creates that circle of support within the communities and the regions themselves, which allow you to actually create interdependent systems. I would tell you, I think now I'm going full on nerd and fully geeking, and Valerie's ecstatic. But that's what it takes. Is it's not just a food system; it's a food and hunger and economic system. The whole piece, it has to be looked at as a whole. And that's the way the fund approaches our work.
I think even just, considering if you were to invest in one thing that could create all these different impacts that would address all these other things and save us a lot of money in the end, it would be in food systems and lifting up that you're creating a sense of meaning and purpose and belonging, a space for people to be able to share their gift. Those are all the things that address addictions. And those are all also the opportunities that you could feed people really well. And we know that these nutrition related diseases are directly correlated with a lifetime of malnourishment in one, or a few different vitamins and minerals or micronutrients. And so if we can address that at a time where we're working in an area of prevention, and that's going to prevent us from spending a lot of money in things like the Affordable Care Act on heart disease, which is going to be unaffordable here, within the next decade. It is this crazy trajectory that we're on, and we can stop it by feeding people adequately now. And it starts investing in food systems.
The other thing I wanted to share too, before we lose our time, is one of the areas that we're charged to work in within our trust agreement that creates the fund is advocacy. What we found in the early days of COVID is that tribal governments are literally left out of the list of organizations that are allowed to actually accept emergency food. Why? What is that about? How do you actually get in the middle of a disaster and then realize that tribal governments who are already sweeping into action literally cannot access the emergency food available through the federal government? And that's a matter of policy. The other thing we saw early on was we heard numerous reports from tribal governments who had big food operations, growing a lot of fruits and vegetables, but they were being prohibited by the interpretation of the laws and policies from actually serving those to their own WIC recipients. They were being told they had to leave their reservation during a pandemic, oh, by the way, and go out and buy the food elsewhere to serve with their WIC recipients. That's a head scratcher, quite frankly. And, it's those kinds of policy interventions. I mean, we can do a lot of infrastructure. We can do a lot of lifting up our communities, data collection, all of that. But we also have, the fund has a responsibility under our trust agreement to figure out some of the policy things that are off. It's written into our responsibilities as an entity. So I think we got to, now is a really important time to unpack and to really deeply examine a lot of the things that we've done because we've done. Let's not do that. Let's actually fix and build it. Sorry, I'm going to invoke the words, build back better. Why don't we do that? So.
And Janie, you hit on a point that I hear a lot, which is just there's a either misinterpretation or misunderstanding of policy. And so that gets in the way of actual solutions and building of solutions. And so if you could share with the people that are listening in, what are a couple recommendations of the go-to organizations? I'm assuming you're one of them, but trusted go-to organizations for people to get that information. And if it's your organization, how can people, in this work to be a better ally and try to gain knowledge of what we don't know, how would you direct people to help with that? Because there is a lot of misinterpretation.
Yeah, I think I'm not going to give you a one size fits all answer here. What I am going to ask you to do, or whoever might be interested in this response, the fund is here, and we have a set of grantees that that the fund is likely going to continue to have over time. I would tell you, and I think Valerie would agree, a lot of those organizations are very community level. Some are regional and some are national. But there is a wide array of tribal governments, nonprofits, educational institutions, tribal colleges that are among our grantees, some that are not, some we know of. But I think kind of unpacking what the fund is able to see in terms of who we fund, right, can actually point folks into directions of power players, in their region. A lot of folks don't work at the national level, right? They work within regions and localities. And I think that's a really exciting thing to think about, is to take a look at what what organizations the fund is supporting. But then we're happy to pick up the phone with anyone and talk you through some of the political tribal government organizations that are regionally based and who does what. Because there's basically way too much to do in this space. And so a lot of our national organizations have carved out spaces that they work collaboratively with other intertribal organizations, just like we do. But it's really important to do your homework, and we can help. The fund can help. Valerie, I just opened the door to your telephone number and your email. But our team, the funds team, can help because we really focus on things at a regional level so that we can get a good sense of landscape. And not everybody wants to deal with things at a national level. There are national intertribal organizations who work in this space, but we also need people to connect locally. That's really important.
That's great. Yes, and thank you. And I think opening up those names of grantees will be helpful to people too as a resource. I know we only have a couple minutes. I want to just say thank you to both of you so much for your valuable time and experience and knowledge. This has been really eye-opening, hopefully to a lot of people, myself included. Again, I want to congratulate you, Janie, on the nomination, and just give you a chance to give some last-minute thoughts before we close. I also just want to really quickly thank FRAC and all of the conference planners behind the scenes that have helped Katie and I know the two of you, we've had lots of tech calls, and so we're so grateful to all of you behind the scenes that are pulling plugs for us. But if you have any last thoughts before we close out.
My last thought is this. The Native American Agriculture Fund has some amazing folks, and you've got to put Valerie's face back up there. But she's one of them, and she has forgotten more than I will learn in this space. I'm just going to tell you. And we have others of our awesome staff who have forgotten more than I will ever learn in the spaces, in the nooks and crannies of food and agriculture. And I just hope that everybody who's listening in will consider Valerie a resource, consider the fund a resource, but really look to the fund's staff, because we've got some really great folks who can really help you engage as a better ally and supporter of this work. But she didn't know I was going to do this, but you've got to actually lift up the people who are going to be with the organization of the fund after I'm gone. And it's not about me, it's about them. They are incredible, and they can help point you in right directions. And I look forward to FRAC and Feeding America and all the other organizations that are listening in, learning how to really see us and not erase us, and really lean into our communities, as Valerie said.
Oh, thanks, Janie. I feel lucky and spoiled rotten every single day to be working alongside all these folks, and know that.
Oh gosh. So Katie, I'm going to say goodbye to everybody.
Yes, it looks like we. Thank you so much, Janie.
Happy to be here.
We really appreciate your time. Looks like we're all cutting out, but have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your day. And thank you all for joining us.
Thanks.